The paradox here is that baseball, which precipitated the analytic revolution in every sport, right? I mean, the analytics in field hockey are pretty cool too, right? Um, is the one that's been most damaged by it. Analytics tells football coaches in the NFL, go for it on fourth down. Nobody ever went for it on fourth down. But it turns out the numbers tell the coach, your chances of scoring or keeping the ball anyway are much better if you use the fourth down. Analytics led to the creation of the 3-point shot and the revolution that gave us Stephen Curry, right? I mean, now people are getting bored with that, but they were more supple. They were younger institutions, and they were able to react to change in the way information is processed, in a way that baseball couldn't, because it was hidebound by old fans who only wanted to see baseball played exactly like it always has been. In fact, baseball has changed, is always changed. It's always evolved. Um, what what happened specifically to impede the ability to respond was the creation of the designated hitter. In 1973, the American League voted to have a designated hitter, that meaning that the pitcher no longer would pitch. Meaning that the pitcher would no longer hit. There were some, pitchers who were really good hitters. The Dodgers were such a lousy hitting team in the early 60s that Don Drysdale was one of their top pinch hitters, right? So there were pitchers who could hit. Koufax was not among them. So they decide that to get more offense into the game, we're going to stop having the futile at bats of pitchers like wimping out at the plate and put in a designated hitter. Well, fans of the game went bonkers. It was treasonous. They would have strung up the commissioner if they could have. And it was there was such a backlash that the National League didn't institute it for another 50 years. So baseball became institutionally inert, a kind of laissez-faire management, of the game prevailed, so that as these, tremendous societal and technological changes were coming, they didn't respond to anything. They didn't respond when cable TV came in and well, gee, we better adjust to this, and what is this going to mean long term? They didn't respond particularly when when people started having arms, cauliflower necks and things. They were just stultified, and they were hidebound partly because of the fans and in the sense that they didn't want change, and also because it had always worked. And it goes back to a guy named William Holbert. He's in the Hall of Fame, and he's one of the guys who created the National League. And in order to get the rowdies who owned franchises back in the day to agree to a degree of uniformity, meaning number of guys on a team, number of games in a season, where the mound was vis-a-vis the plate, of course, pitching overhand rather than underhand, all those kinds of things. In order to get them to agree to come together in an organized fashion, he gave them in perpetuity marketing rights for their local territories. Now, there probably wasn't a lot to be made in the 1870s. But as time went along and we start to get radio, in 1921 in Pittsburgh, first game, and then 1927, the first World Series is broadcast on radio. And now suddenly people are, selling sponsorships and earning money from radio broadcasts, which then morphs into TV rights and selling your TV rights to a beer company, for example, and follow that line all the way along to the big cable companies that came about in the 70s and 80s, WGN and Ted Turner, um, and baseball's still stuck in a world where revenues for local teams are dependent solely on geography. So if you're the Kansas City Royals in 2025, you can only earn so much by selling your broadcast rights, uh, maybe 40 to $50 million. Compare that to the Los Angeles Dodgers, who sold their 25 years of broadcast rights to Spectrum Charter for $8.2 billion. And there you see the institutional problem of the haves and the have nots. When this series began, when this World Series began, and just before it, people were talking and writing a lot about whether it would be a factor in the coming labor negotiations. The collective bargaining agreement will expire on December 2nd, 2026. And baseball owners, and certainly the commissioner, fervently believe that the game needs a salary cap of the kind that is imposed in the NBA and the NFL and the NHL. Players are adamant that their earnings should not be capped and that the system has worked well for baseball. So the truth lies somewhere in between. The players are not going to give this right up, which was hard won by Marvin Miller, the former executive director of the Baseball Players Association, and prior to that, the U.S. Steelworkers. So this was no schlub, this guy, right? And Marvin freed the slaves, such as they were, in not just professional baseball, but across the board. But as the broadcast rights, landscape changed, from difference between 1976 when this came about and today, the volume of dollars is exorbitant. I don't know how many people lived in Los Angeles in 1975, but it wasn't as many as that live there now, right? And so you have big cities with their own broadcast systems, earning gazillion dollars a year, and then the small teams. So, and it turns out, it's all because of this guy, William Holbert, in 1978. Sorry, excuse me. It's all because of this guy, William Holbert, who gives that right of promotion and marketing to the individual owners and the locality. And that's something people started writing about just before the 2025 World Series. Wouldn't it be great if the Dodgers played the Brewers? Talk about, small revenue teams, small television market, and the Brewers beat them. Then you could see this as a proxy war between the big earners, big spenders, and the little guys who have to make do and use their smarts to get their way. It didn't happen, frankly, not surprisingly. The World Series featured two incredibly high spending teams. The Toronto Blue Jays, who are really a national team in Toronto and ranked fifth in payroll this last year, 2025, and the Dodgers, who I wish I had looked this up for you, but what they spent just on pitching last year was astonishing. So this is part of what baseball is facing, and again, it is not particular to baseball. The computer revolution didn't start because somebody wanted to figure out a better way to score runs, a more efficient way to score runs. This was all in progress, but baseball, being as public and as covered and as drawing as much attention to it as it did, once the Moneyball revolution in baseball was launched by Michael Lewis in 2003 in his best-selling book, and people saw that there was a way for the Oakland A's, if ever there was a small market team with small money who had to figure out a better, smarter way to find and calculate value in order to be competitive, right? It just took off, and people said, oh, look at baseball. So everything is now, it's the money ball of the car wash industry. It's the money ball of LASIK surgery. I mean, that's the reference point now for everything. And it did take off, and it's a very monkey see, monkey do industry. So when people saw the A's succeeding with this and the attention that was drawn, it became something that everybody wanted to do, even people who didn't need to save that kind of money or didn't have or had money to spend wanted to do it that way. Of course, there was a degree to which the Moneyball revolution was also based on the fact that they had a great pitching staff. It wasn't just because Billy Beane found value in a sore arm catcher named Scott Hatteberg, who is one of the main characters in this book, and who was taught how to play first base and who could do something that nobody had ever valued before. He could get on base. By the end of the season, the Paul DePodesta, who was Billy Beane's right hand man, calculated that if the A's had had all 9 batters being Scott Hattebergs, right, they would have scored more runs than the New York Yankees. That's how valuable, his ability to create runs was. This was a searing, revolutionary, understanding. And it has had a lot to do with why the game is played so differently. Getting on base, walks,